And to me, this is where I would feel really uneasy if I were advising John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, because yeah, he's not worth the money that you're paying him right now. And he may really not be worth the money that he's going to be paid in the next couple of years. But are you prepared to abandon this plan and maybe look horrible 3 years from now as he's playing really good football in another organization? Or are you going to bite the bullet on the cap and just pay the money and stay with the plan? What's your guess? Will they stay the course? If this thing is going to take 3 more years before he's really ready, will they stay the course or will they move off of the player?
I think they may move off of the player as early as the beginning of the season, depending on what happens. And I think it depends on.
I get that sense too.
Yeah, and the way I sort of see this is.
By the way, do you agree with that? I mean, do you feel? I mean, do you still see him as a franchise quarterback like I do, just 2-3 years off, or do you think that it's not going to happen for him?
Physically, I see it, and he seems like a good kid, and he's a smart kid, and all that stuff. I don't know what they've seen at practice. I don't know what they see when they're looking at film and meetings. Something has soured them on him somewhere. So I think physically, he can change his motion. He can work to get more accurate. And I agree with you. I think 2 or 3 years, he has a chance to still be a very good quarterback. But they've seen something, Larry, something that has soured them on him. And I don't know what that is. And I don't think it's anything we've seen. I don't think it's anything the general public have seen. I think it's something, again, in the meeting room or on the practice field. Something has clearly given them pause. Maybe it's the fact that he's been injured 3 times or 4 times already in 4 starts or whatever it's been. I don't know. But I think what they see in Purdy, I think what Kyle Shanahan wants at quarterback is an extension of Kyle Shanahan. He wants a quarterback to run his offense, and sort of when Kyle wants him to hit the B button, that's where he throws the ball. And it would be nice if they have a little escapability. And that's exactly what Purdy is. We had Ross Tucker on the show a couple days ago. We were talking about this situation. And this is one of the plays that stuck out to me, and I think it was in the Seattle playoff game. There was a play where Deebo Samuel is streaking across the field, and he's wide open. I mean, there's nobody around him. And Purdy throws a post to Brandon Ayuk. And Ayuk kind of broke the route off, and it looked like a bad pass, but Ayuk just didn't turn the right way. They pan to Purdy, and Purdy's kind of making a motion with his hand, like, why didn't you keep going? And then they pan to Kyle Shanahan, and Kyle Shanahan's doing the same thing, like, why didn't you keep going? So regardless of how open Deebo was, and everybody was on Twitter like, oh, he missed Deebo. Kyle wanted the ball to go to Ayuk. Purdy threw the ball to Ayuk. They're on the same wavelength. And I really think that's where Kyle is with Purdy, where he's like, wow, I got this dude who's seen the field the same way as me. He's got a little escapability. Like, this guy's perfect. He's just going to run my offense. That's where I think he is with Purdy, where Trey is just, he's just a ball of clay. He can turn into, like you said, a franchise quarterback, but I don't know that that's going to happen. And I don't think the 49ers have the time for it. There's a lot of, I think, assumption that they're going to be back in the NFC Championship game, and they very well may be. But to do that 3 out of 4 years is really hard. And we're asking them to do that 4 out of 5 years now. So I'm not saying they can't. I'm saying a lot of things have to go right, and they need to take advantage of this window. And I just think they feel Purdy is the one guy they have that can do that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. They're in such a tough spot now because they don't have time to play him. And to develop them. There is no minor league system. Okay. You could argue that he won't develop fully without playing.
Probably won't.
And they don't want his value to move off of him at this point is not probably enough to intrigue them in any way. They just went through a bunch of quarterbacks last year. So if they trade him and they incur quarterback injuries, they'll be raked over the coals by the fan base and by the media for, trading away a young quarterback prospect. And his when he will blossom is anybody's guess. So it's a speculative deal. They could trade him this year. He could wind up somewhere else. And I know that even though there may not be anybody really willing to offer up anything real in compensation, there's still teams around the league that just based on his character and his athleticism we'll bring him in at a minimum contract and develop him. So then it's like, well, what if he develops? What if you get, at the cut down date, you trade him for a 7th round pick, and I just threw out a 7th round pick just as the lowest compensation I can think of. Let's say there's no market for him and nobody wants to trade anything for him, and you were forced to either keep him on your cap at big numbers, or trade him for a late round pick. He could easily go somewhere else, and maybe the light comes on because he gets some consistent playing time, and then all of a sudden he's playing really well. And then what? Now you're talking about a 6'4" kid with, very athletic, who's potentially could play very good football, maybe even high level football. So I mean, like, you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. If you play him and he struggles, you could lose your job, right? I mean, I'm not saying that Kyle's on the hot seat, but they're in their window right now. They need to win right now. So of course they're going with Purdy. This is not really about Purdy at all. It's actually kind of a disservice to Brock that he even gets brought into this conversation. He's done nothing to be brought into this conversation except for play great football. It's really more about Trey's not a 2-year project. Trey's like a 5-year project, and we're already a couple years in, but there's a couple more years to come, it sounds like, and he needs to play to develop. John Lynch even said it, Al, at the combine. He's like, Trey needs to play, and that's the challenge, because we got a club that's ready to go. And what he didn't say there was what I read, which was he's not going to play here because he's not ready to go. He's so raw that we don't trust him to trust in his consistent. See, I've seen him do it in practice, but what it's about is it's about consistency. It's about not just doing it once. It's about doing it the same way every day with consistency. And that's what Brock offers them. So they're going with Brock. But I also think there's a very good chance that maybe the other 2 quarterbacks they have there maybe also have shown a little bit more consistency. Now, I haven't been there I've been there for every media availability, but they only make 1 day available per week. So, and to me, if you said to me, what do you see? I see a guy that's very comparable size-wise and talent-wise, and even performance-wise during these OTAs and minicamp to Sam Darnold. But I'm not there. I'm only getting 20% of the practices. I don't know what he's doing in the other 80%. I don't know how he's performing in the meetings. I don't know his base knowledge of football compared to the other quarterbacks. They have a lot more to go on than we do. So the one thing I refuse to do is I refuse to, every single time somebody who has some perspective or some connection, whether it be a Mark Schlereth, an Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, and Albert Breer. These guys are responsible reporters who do talk to people. And just because they got the Mac Jones, they traded up for Mac Jones, and they didn't trade up for Mac Jones. They ultimately wind up taking Trey. Just because they got that wrong doesn't mean that they're all collectively wrong when they say that Sam Darnold is ahead of Trey Lance. My guess at this point, as the number of people saying it, build up, that they're probably right. And what I'm seeing is probably wrong, right? I'm seeing comparable guys, but maybe Trey and Sam really aren't as comparable as what my eyes are telling me. So I just think they're in a really, really tough spot. If you trade him and he blossoms somewhere else, people will question you and rake you over the coals. If you play him and he plays poorly, people will complain about that, call him a failure. It's just, I don't think you can get a lot in return. I guess if I were Lynch and Shanahan, I'd play it the way they're playing it, which is bring him to camp, let him compete. Maybe he has a good preseason. Maybe somebody suffers an injury, and maybe at the cut down, somebody offers you a mid-round pick or a player, and you can at least say to your fans, yeah, you know what? We had to pivot off of Trey here, but we got Danielle Hunter. Or, it didn't work out with Trey, but, for this kind of a deal with Trey and a pick and a player, we got Montez Sweat, or, something like that. And you can say, you know what? We're all in on winning this year, and we wish Trey the best because they really like him. That's the other thing. He's a great guy.
Great
and
guy.
they really like the kid, and they really like that they just see the rawness in his game, know he's going to make mistakes, and refuse to to have the ship go down this year or to even lose any games, to develop him through those through those games where you have to, he needs development. I guess that's my thought on it. Give me your reaction, and give me what was Tucker's takeaway, because I made a note to myself to go check that out, but I haven't seen it yet, and I really like Ross. Credit to you for getting him on your podcast. What was his takeaway on Trey and what he needs?
Well, he kind of looked at it from the outside looking in too, and he sort of turned around and asked the question on me a little bit. He's like, well, how did we get to this point? How did they draft this guy? And now it's gotten to this point. It's the same thing. He's just so green. He just doesn't have the experience. And you brought up a really good point. I just wanted to say, when you said with Brock, this isn't fair to him. And you're right, because if any rookie did what Brock Purdy did, we would be crowning him the next great thing. When you really look at what they did, Larry, the Niners could not score points for like a full year. It was like 20 games they were struggling going back to 2021 and into the playoffs. They had trouble scoring. You go into 2022, they're still having trouble scoring. And then they get McCaffrey. That made a big difference. I'm not saying it did not. It made a huge difference. But even in the games with Garoppolo and McCaffrey, they were horrible against the Chargers offensively. The Saints shut them down. And then Brock comes in, and they're scoring at levels we haven't seen since Steve Young. 32.5 points a game. They're just going up and down the field. Now, did McCaffrey play a big role in that? Sure. Does he have a lot of people around him? Absolutely. But they had a lot of people around them in the year previous. They had all these guys. So Purdy came in and sort of made something click. His TD percentage was 7.6%. The only 49er quarterbacks in a minimum of 7 games that were higher were Montana in 1987, and Steve Young was also 7.6 in 1994. If Trevor Lawrence did that in year one, if Mac Jones did that in year one, if Trey Lance had done that in year one, people would be like, oh my God. A 17-game average for what Purdy did is about 4,000 yards, 34 TDs, and 7 interceptions. That's all pro type numbers. So the fact that, he's a 7th round pick, everybody wants to hit the brakes, and maybe he will crash down to earth. I don't know. But what he did as a rookie, what I saw him do in the playoffs when he struggled in the first half against Seattle and then came out in the second half, brushed it off, and was phenomenal. When he played one of the best defenses in the league, and I always prepare it as a pitcher who doesn't have your best stuff. Sometimes you just got to get people out however you can. And that's kind of what he did in that Dallas game. He just didn't make the big mistake. And then he made a couple, off the cuff plays when he had to, made some big throws at the end, and they win the game. He outplayed the $40 million quarterback on the other side of the field, who was also playing a great defense. So to knock him, or like you said, it's not really fair to him. In any other situation, he'd be in question starter and everybody would just shut up. So it's kind of like, but in the Trey thing, you brought up, how do they get rid of him if they decide to move on? And how do you sell it? And people will say, okay, it's sort of a wash because Lance didn't work out, but Purdy did. Well, not really, because you did still give up 2 first-round picks for Lance. And the Niners are great. They've done a great job building the roster. I'm not saying they haven't. Phenomenal. And they're phenomenal with late-round picks. But we are going into the season, a season that is Super Bowl or bust, with Colt McKivitz at right tackle we have no idea about. And really nobody on the opposite side at defensive end of Nick Bosa. We hope Drake Jackson can take a next step. We hope Chris Kosura can work his magic with a Farrell or an Austin Bryant or something like that. You didn't have 2 first-round picks. If you have those 2 first-round picks, maybe you have another right tackle. Maybe you have an edge you're really excited about. So that stuff plays into it too. So if they do move on from him, they do have to try to replenish something, because they did miss out on that. But it'll be a tough sell, because there's still a lot of fans who I think, like you said, think Trey can do it. And they want to see this through, and we've seen the injuries in this QB room. I don't want to trade him. I think they need to keep him on the roster this year, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if a light bulb goes on, and then worry about next year. That's kind of my thought process on it. But I think there's a good chance he may not be here as early as September.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm with you exactly. I want to keep him on the roster this year. And I want to keep developing him, because I still believe he's going to be a franchise quarterback. But I also agree with John Lynch that he has to play, and he won't become a franchise quarterback if he doesn't play.